Hello, everyone, and welcome. Today we're going to tackle a huge question, one of the biggest in all of science, really. What does it actually mean to be alive? You might think it's a simple question, right? But the answer, well, the answer takes us deep inside the very engine of what makes things be. So let's get right into it, into the amazing world of life processes.
All right, let's start with the big one. What is the real scientific difference between something that's living and something that isn't? You and I, we feel like we know the answer, don't we? It's kind of instinctive. But as we're about to find out, it's a lot more complicated than you might think.
So yeah, that's exactly what this first part is all about. We're going to poke at our own assumptions a little bit, to figure out what the real definition of life is. And trust me, it's not as simple as it looks.
Okay, think about it. If you see a dog running around or a person shouting, your brain just instantly goes, yep, that's alive. It's totally automatic, a judgment we make based on movement we can see. Super obvious, right? Well, that's our first clue.
But hang on a second. What about a sleeping dog? Not a lot of movement there. Or a plant. I mean, you can't actually see it growing minute by minute. So, are they not alive? No, of course they are. And right there, that tells us our first easy idea, that life is just visible movement. Well, that can't be the full picture.
So what's the big takeaway here? It's that just using our eyes, just relying on what we can see, it's not good enough. It's not scientific enough. To really get to the heart of what life is, we have to look deeper. We have to think smaller, like way, way smaller.
And here we are. This is the real secret, the one thing that's true for all life. It's molecular movement. See, even when something, anything, looks totally still on the outside, on the inside, it's like a crazy busy city. There's this constant, invisible dance of molecules happening inside every single cell. This tiny, microscopic action, that's the real engine of life.
Okay, but why? Why all this constant movement? What's the point of all that activity? Well, here's a good way to think about it. Imagine any living thing, a plant, an animal, you, as a super complex, super organized machine. And just like any machine, it needs constant maintenance, a constant repair job.
Living things are just amazing feats of organization, right? You've got cells making up tissues, tissues making up organs. It's all so structured. But the world, the environment around us, is always trying to break that structure down. Things naturally wear out and break. So, in a way, life is just this constant, nonstop fight against chaos. And this quote really just nails it. To stay alive, every living creature has to keep repairing itself, has to keep maintaining its own structure. It's a full-time job that never, ever stops, and it takes a ton of energy.
So how does this huge maintenance job get done? Well, it's carried out by these 4 essential life processes. You can think of them like the body's ultimate maintenance crew. First, you've got nutrition. That's getting the fuel and the parts. Then, respiration. That's how you get the energy out of the fuel. Transportation is the delivery system, moving everything around. And finally, excretion. That's taking out the trash.
All right, let's zoom in on that first one, because it's the foundation for everything else. Nutrition. All that energy we talked about for the big repair job, it all comes from food. So that leads to a pretty basic question, right? Where does all this food come from in the first place?
So on our planet, there are basically 2 main game plans for getting food. First up, you have the autotrophs. Think auto like automatic. They feed themselves. These are creatures like plants who can make their own food from really simple stuff. And then there's us. We're heterotrophs. We have to get our energy by eating other living things.
Let's spend a minute on the autotrophs, because what they can do is, well, it's pretty incredible. It almost seems like magic, but it's not. It's just really, really cool biochemistry. It's a process called photosynthesis. Let's dig into how plants literally make their own food right out of thin air.
So, to break it down, photosynthesis is basically this. Plants take in 2 really simple ingredients, carbon dioxide, which they get from the air, and water, which they get from the soil. Then, they use the energy from sunlight, captured by this special green stuff called chlorophyll, to smash those ingredients together and turn them into carbohydrates. And those carbohydrates, that's their food. And check this out. This is where the magic happens. We're looking at a slice of a leaf zoomed way in. You see all those little green dots packed inside the cells? Those are called chloroplasts, and you can just think of them as thousands of tiny solar-powered kitchens where the plant is cooking up its food all day long. The whole thing happens in 3 main steps. It's actually pretty straightforward. Step 1, the chlorophyll soaks up the light energy from the sun. Step 2, that light energy gets turned into chemical energy, and it's used to split water molecules apart. And finally, step 3, that new chemical energy is used to build those food molecules, the carbohydrates, out of carbon dioxide, and boom, plant food.
Okay, so that's the theory. Sounds pretty neat. But how do we actually know it's true? Remember, science isn't just about memorizing facts, it's about proving them. So let's get into a scientific mindset for a second. Let's look at how we can actually test these ideas.
All right, first question for our experiment. How can we prove for sure that chlorophyll, that green stuff, is absolutely necessary for the plant to make food, which, by the way, it stores as starch?
So for this, scientists use a really clever little trick. They use what's called a variegated leaf. You know, one of those leaves that has both green parts and white parts? Then they do a simple starch test on it. All you need to know is that iodine turns blue-black whenever it touches starch. So look at the result. What do you see? Only the parts that were green to begin with turn dark. How cool is that?
The proof is right there. You can't argue with it. Starch was only made in the parts of the leaf that actually had chlorophyll. The white parts just couldn't do it. So there you have it. We've just proven our first point. You absolutely need chlorophyll for photosynthesis. Check.
Okay, awesome. On to the next challenge. We've got chlorophyll sorted, but what about carbon dioxide? How do we prove that this gas, just floating around in the air, is also totally essential? Well, here's the experiment. It's pretty smart. You take two plants that are pretty much identical, and you put them each under a big glass jar. Now, with one of them, you also put in a chemical called potassium hydroxide, and all that does is suck up all the carbon dioxide from the air inside the jar. The other plant is just our normal control. So after a while, which plant do you think is going to have starch in its leaves?
And the result is crystal clear. The plant that was starved of carbon dioxide, it couldn't make any starch at all. Zero. So this simple but really elegant experiment proves it. CO2 isn't just nice to have. It's a critical ingredient for photosynthesis. You can't do it without it.
So there we have it. We've seen that plants are these amazing, self-sufficient food factories, right? They're literally pulling their food right out of the air and sunlight. But that just leads to the next big question. What about us? We can't do that. So how does our maintenance job get done? That's a story for next time. Stay curious, everyone.
हेलो बच्चों, कैसे हो सब? चलो, आज लाइफ प्रोसेसेस चैप्टर का एक सुपर डुपर इंटरेस्टिंग टॉपिक उठाते हैं। आज हम सब बनेंगे डिटेक्टिव्स, अ लिटिल बिट ऑफ जासूसी करेंगे और ये पता लगाएंगे कि कल रात जो बिरयानी या पिज्ज़ा तुमने दबा कर खाया था, उसका तुम्हारी बॉडी के अंदर आखिर हुआ क्या? रेडी हो? तो शुरू करते हैं एक बहुत ही सिंपल लेकिन इंपॉर्टेंट सवाल से। ये जो खाना हम रोज खाते हैं, ये अंदर जाके करता क्या है? I mean, क्या इसका काम सिर्फ पेट भरना है या इसके पीछे कोई बड़ी कहानी है? चलो आज इस पजल को सॉल्व करके ही रहेंगे। ओके, तो सबसे पहले ना एक कॉमन कंफ्यूजन क्लियर करते हैं। देखो, जैसा हम इंसान खाना खाते हैं, जरूरी नहीं कि दुनिया में हर लिविंग थिंग वैसे ही खाता हो। इनफैक्ट कुछ के तरीके तो इतने अजीब हैं, यू विल बी सरप्राइज्ड। हम बात करने वाले हैं हेट्रोट्रॉफिक न्यूट्रिशन की। साउंड्स कॉम्प्लिकेटेड? बिल्कुल नहीं। सिंपल शब्दों में वो सारे ऑर्गेनिजम्स जो अपना खाना खुद नहीं बना सकते और दूसरों पर डिपेंड करते हैं। ये जो वर्ड है ना, हेट्रोट्रोफिक, इसको तोड़कर देखते हैं। हेटेरो मतलब अदर्स और ट्रोफिक मतलब न्यूट्रिशन। तो इसका सीधा सा मतलब हुआ दूसरों से न्यूट्रिशन लेना। बेसिकली एनर्जी के लिए दूसरे लिविंग थिंग्स पर डिपेंड करना, बिल्कुल वैसे ही जैसे एक शेर हिरन पर डिपेंड करता है और हम तो प्लांट्स और एनिमल्स दोनों पर ही डिपेंड करते हैं। सो यस, हम सब इसी टीम के प्लेयर्स हैं। अब देखो, हेट्रोट्रोफ्स के पास भी फूड लेने के 3 अलग अलग मास्टर प्लान्स हैं। स्ट्रैटेजी नंबर 1, फंगी या मशरूम वाला स्टाइल। ये क्या करते हैं? पहले खाने को बॉडी के बाहर ही डिकम्पोज करते हैं, उसको सड़ाते गलाते हैं और फिर उसके लिक्विड न्यूट्रिएंट्स आराम से अब्जॉर्ब कर लेते हैं। स्मार्ट, हाँ? स्ट्रैटेजी नंबर 2, ये है हमारा स्टाइल। पूरा का पूरा खाना पहले बॉडी के अंदर और फिर अंदर डाइजेशन का काम शुरू। एंड स्ट्रैटेजी नंबर 3, पैरासिटिक स्टाइल, जैसे टिक्स, लीचेस या मच्छर। ये दूसरे जिंदा होस्ट से न्यूट्रिशन चुराते हैं बट उसको मारते नहीं, बिल्कुल फ्रीलोडर्स की तरह। ऑलराइट, तो बाकी सब की बातें छोड़ते हैं और अब आते हैं अपनी मेन स्टोरी पर। हमारी स्टोरी, एक निवाले का वो इनक्रेडिबल सफर जो शुरू होता है सीधा हमारे मुंह से। ये देखिए स्क्रीन पर, ये है हमारे फूड के सफर का पूरा मैप। इस लंबी सी वाइंडिंग ट्यूब को हम कहते हैं ह्यूमन एलिमेंट्री कनाल। तो चलो, जैसे ही खाना फर्स्ट स्टेशन यानी हमारे मुंह में एंटर करता है, लेट्स फॉलो इट। पता है, हमारा मुंह एक चलती फिरती फूड प्रोसेसिंग फैक्ट्री है। सोचो, जैसे ही खाना अंदर गया, सबसे पहले टीथ उसकी ग्राइंडिंग शुरू कर देते हैं, उसको छोटे छोटे टुकड़ों में तोड़ देते हैं। फिर सीन में आती है सलाइवा यानी लार। ये सिर्फ खाने को गीला नहीं करती, इसके अंदर एक सीक्रेट एजेंट है, एक केमिकल सोल्जर जिसका नाम है सैलिवरी अमाइलेज। इसका काम है स्टार्च यानी कॉम्प्लेक्स कार्बोहाइड्रेट को वहीं के वहीं तोड़ना शुरू कर देना। और हमारी टंग, वो एक मास्टर मिक्सर है जो सब कुछ आपस में मिक्स करके एक सॉफ्ट बॉल बना देती है। अब खाने का ये गोला, जिसे बोलिस कहते हैं, नीचे जाता है एक पाइप से जिसका नाम है एसोफेगस। और एक कॉमन मिस्टेक लोग सोचते हैं कि ये ग्रेविटी से नीचे गिरता है। नो, ऐसा बिल्कुल नहीं है। इस पाइप के जो मसल्स हैं वो एक वेव की तरह कॉन्ट्रैक्ट और रिलैक्स करते हैं और खाने को जेंटली पुश करते हैं नीचे की तरफ। इस ब्यूटीफुल वेव लाइक मूवमेंट को कहते हैं पेरिस्टाल्टिक मूवमेंट। और इस मूवमेंट के बाद हमारा नेक्स्ट स्टॉप है द स्टमक। ओके, अब इमेजिन करो कि हमारा स्टमक एक सुपर एडवांस्ड मिक्सर ग्राइंडर है। जैसे ही खाना इसमें गिरता है ना, इसकी जो मस्कुलर वॉल्स हैं वो उसको जोर जोर से चर्न करती हैं, घुमाती हैं। और इसी चर्निंग के बीच उस पर स्प्रे किया जाता है एक बहुत ही पावरफुल केमिकल कॉकटेल जिसे हम कहते हैं गैस्ट्रिक जूसेस। इस गैस्ट्रिक जूस की टीम में 3 स्टार प्लेयर्स हैं। प्लेयर नंबर 1, हाइड्रोक्लोरिक एसिड या HCl। ये एक बहुत ही स्ट्रॉन्ग एसिड है जो खाने के साथ आए सारे जर्म्स का काम तमाम कर देता है। प्लेयर नंबर 2, पेप्सिन। ये एक स्पेशल एंजाइम है जिसका टारगेट है प्रोटीन। ये प्रोटीन को तोड़ना शुरू कर देता है। लेकिन रुको, एक सवाल, अगर एसिड इतना स्ट्रॉन्ग है तो वो हमारे पेट को ही क्यों नहीं डाइजेस्ट कर देता? वेल, यहाँ एंट्री होती है हमारे हीरो की, म्यूकस। ये म्यूकस पेट की अंदर वाली लाइनिंग पर एक प्रोटेक्टिव शील्ड बना लेता है जिससे एसिड उसको नुकसान नहीं पहुंचा पाता। तो स्टमक में आधी अधूरी डाइजेशन के बाद ये जो सेमी डाइजेस्टेड फूड है, इसको धीरे धीरे स्मॉल अमाउंट्स में आगे भेजा जाता है। कहाँ? इस सफर के सबसे लंबे और शायद सबसे इंपॉर्टेंट पार्ट में, द स्मॉल इंटेस्टाइन यानी हमारी छोटी आंत। और यहाँ पर एक बड़ा ही अमेजिंग फैक्ट है। पता है, स्मॉल इंटेस्टाइन की लेंथ इस बात पर डिपेंड करती है कि एनिमल क्या खाता है। जो घास फूस खाने वाले हर्बिवोर्स होते हैं जैसे गाय, उनकी स्मॉल इंटेस्टाइन बहुत बहुत लंबी होती है क्योंकि घास में होता है सेल्यूलोज जिसको डाइजेस्ट करना बहुत मुश्किल है। वहीं दूसरी तरफ कार्निवोर्स जैसे शेर जो मीट खाते हैं, उनकी इंटेस्टाइन काफ़ी छोटी होती है बिकॉज मीट को डाइजेस्ट करना कंपैरेटिवली बहुत आसान है। इज़न्ट दैट कूल? अब स्मॉल इंटेस्टाइन में होता है फाइनल शोडाउन, अब फाइनल डाइजेशन। और इसके लिए एक पूरी ड्रीम टीम काम करती है। टीम मेंबर नंबर 1, लिवर। लिवर भेजता है बाइल जूस। इसके 2 इंपॉर्टेंट काम हैं। पहला, स्टमक से आए एसिडिक फूड को एल्कलाइन बनाना यानी न्यूट्रल करना। और दूसरा, फैट के बड़े बड़े ग्लोब्यूल्स को छोटे छोटे ड्रॉपलेट्स में तोड़ना, बिल्कुल वैसे जैसे साबुन तेल को तोड़ता है। टीम मेंबर नंबर 2, पैनक्रियास। ये भेजता है पैनक्रियाटिक जूस जिसमें होते हैं सुपर पावरफुल एंजाइम्स जो प्रोटीन्स और फैट्स पर अटैक करते हैं। और फाइनल टीम मेंबर, इंटेस्टिन की अपनी दीवारें। ये खुद इंटेस्टिनल जूस रिलीज करती हैं जो बचे कुचे सभी कॉम्प्लेक्स कार्बोहाइड्रेट्स, प्रोटीन्स और फैट्स को उनके सबसे सिंपल फॉर्म में तोड़ देती हैं। बस, गेम ओवर फॉर कॉम्प्लेक्स फूड। ठीक है, तो डाइजेशन पूरा हो चुका है, सारे न्यूट्रिएंट्स सिंपल फॉर्म में आ गए हैं। लेकिन अब अ बिग क्वेश्चन, ये सारे न्यूट्रिएंट्स हमारे ब्लड तक पहुंचेंगे कैसे? इसके लिए स्मॉल इंटेस्टाइन के अंदर की दीवारों पर लाखों करोड़ों छोटे छोटे फिंगर लाइक प्रोजेक्शंस होते हैं। इन्हें कहते हैं विली। अब ये विली क्या करते हैं? इमेजिन करो एक टॉवल, उसकी सरफेस फ्लैट नहीं होती ना, उस पर रेशे होते हैं। ये विली बिल्कुल वैसे ही सरफेस एरिया को कई गुना बढ़ा देते हैं ताकि मैक्सिमम न्यूट्रिएंट्स एब्जॉर्ब होकर सीधा हमारे ब्लड स्ट्रीम में जा सके। लेकिन रुको रुको, स्टोरी अभी खत्म नहीं हुई है। ये तो सिर्फ इंटरवल था। अभी तक क्या हुआ? जो ग्लूकोज ब्लड ने अब्जॉर्ब किया था वो एक सुपर एफिशिएंट डिलीवरी सर्विस की तरह बॉडी के हर एक सेल तक पहुंच चुका है। पर सेल को ग्लूकोज से मतलब नहीं, उसको चाहिए एनर्जी। तो अब शुरू होगा इस गेम का फाइनल लेवल, दी फाइनल बॉस। इस ग्लूकोज को तोड़कर उससे एनर्जी निकालने का प्रोसेस, और इस प्रोसेस को हम कहते हैं रेस्पिरेशन। और हमारे सेल्स, दे आर इनक्रेडिबली स्मार्ट। उनके पास ग्लूकोज से एनर्जी निकालने का सिर्फ एक नहीं बल्कि अलग अलग पाथवेज, अलग अलग रास्ते होते हैं, और वो सिचुएशन के हिसाब से डिसाइड करते हैं कि कौन सा रास्ता फॉलो करना है। इसमें एक चीज हमेशा याद रखना, रास्ता चाहे कोई भी हो, द फर्स्ट स्टेप इज ऑलवेज द सेम, हमेशा। सेल के लिक्विड पार्ट यानी साइटोप्लाज्म में 6 कार्बन वाला ग्लूकोज का मॉलिक्यूल आसान भाषा में कहें तो बीच में टूट जाता है और 3 कार्बन वाले 2 छोटे मॉलिक्यूल्स बनाता है। इन नए मॉलिक्यूल्स का नाम है पाइरूवेट। तो अब इस पाइरूवेट का फ्यूचर क्या है? यहाँ से 3 अलग अलग रास्ते निकलते हैं और सब कुछ इस बात पर डिपेंड करता है कि ऑक्सीजन अवेलेबल है या नहीं। सिनेरियो 1, अगर भरपूर ऑक्सीजन है, जिसे हम कहते हैं एरोबिक रेस्पिरेशन, तो पाइरूवेट सीधा जाता है सेल के पावर हाउस यानी माइटोकॉन्ड्रिया में। वहां ये पूरी तरीके से ब्रेकडाउन होकर कार्बन डाइऑक्साइड, वाटर और अ लॉट ऑफ एनर्जी बनाता है। सिनेरियो 2, अगर ऑक्सीजन बिल्कुल नहीं है, एनारोबिक रेस्पिरेशन जैसे कि यीस्ट में होता है, तो पाइरूवेट कन्वर्ट हो जाता है इथेनॉल और कार्बन डाइऑक्साइड में। पता है, जो ब्रेड बनती है या ड्रिंक्स फर्मेंट होते हैं वो इसी प्रोसेस की वजह से होता है। और सिनेरियो 3, जब हम बहुत तेज एक्सरसाइज करते हैं और हमारे मसल सेल्स में अचानक ऑक्सीजन की कमी हो जाती है, तब पाइरूवेट लैक्टिक एसिड और थोड़ी एनर्जी में बदल जाता है। अच्छा, आपके साथ कभी ऐसा हुआ है कि आप अचानक बहुत तेज दौड़ लिए या हेवी एक्सरसाइज कर लिए और उसके बाद मसल्स में अजीब सा पेन या क्रैम्प्स होने लगते हैं? उसका विलन यही लैक्टिक एसिड है। जब हमारे मसल्स को अर्जेंटली एनर्जी चाहिए होती है और उतनी फास्ट ऑक्सीजन नहीं मिल पाती, तो वो लैक्टिक एसिड बना लेते हैं और इसी लैक्टिक एसिड के जमा होने से या बिल्डअप से ही हमें वो क्रैम्प्स फील होते हैं। अब इतनी देर से हम एनर्जी कर रहे हैं, पर एक बड़ा सवाल, ये जो सारी एनर्जी रिलीज हो रही है, ये जाती कहाँ है? क्या बॉडी इसको ऐसे ही यूज कर लेती है? नहीं, बॉडी इस एनर्जी को एक स्पेशल मॉलिक्यूल में स्टोर करती है, एक पैकेट में बंद करती है। ये मॉलिक्यूल हमारी बॉडी की एनर्जी करेंसी है। जैसे हमारे लिए पैसे रुपीस होते हैं, वैसे ही हमारे सेल्स के लिए वो करेंसी है एटीपी। इसका पूरा नाम है एडेनोसिन ट्राइफॉस्फेट। सबसे आसान तरीका एटीपी को समझने का है, इसको सेल की एक रिचार्जेबल बैटरी समझो। जब रेस्पिरेशन का प्रोसेस होता है तो ये बैटरी चार्ज हो जाती है और फिर जब भी सेल को कोई काम करना हो, चाहे मसल को कॉन्ट्रैक्ट करना हो या नए प्रोटीन्स बनाने हो, वो इसी चार्ज्ड एटीपी बैटरी से पावर ड्रॉ कर लेता है। सिंपल, राइट? तो देखा आपने, एक सिंपल से निवाले से लेकर एक सांस लेने तक आपकी बॉडी के अंदर हर सेकंड कितनी अमेजिंग, कितनी कॉम्प्लेक्स केमिस्ट्री और बायोलॉजी चल रही है। हर पल आपकी बॉडी सच में साइंस का सबसे बड़ा वंडर है ना अमेजिंग? चलो, इस थॉट के साथ आज का सेशन खत्म करते हैं। मिलते हैं अगली क्लास में। Hello students and a very warm welcome. Today we're going to tackle a really important topic from your science book, respiration and circulation. So let's get right into it. So let's kick things off with a big question. We all know we have to breathe to live, right? But have you ever stopped to think about why? What's actually going on inside our bodies when we take a breath? Let's find out. First up, let's talk about the absolute basics, energy. You see, everything you do, from running around to just sitting and thinking, it all needs energy. And the process that gives us this energy is called respiration. Now take a look at this. This process is happening in every single cell of your body, right now. First, the glucose from the food you eat enters a cell. Then, in the cytoplasm, it breaks down into something called pyruvate, which releases a little bit of energy. But here's the most important part. Step 3. Inside the mitochondria, the cell's powerhouses, that pyruvate breaks down even further, but it needs oxygen to do it. And that's what unlocks a huge amount of usable energy. So the main takeaway here is really simple. To get the massive energy release our bodies need to function, we absolutely need a constant supply of oxygen. And that, my friends, is why we breathe. Okay, so getting oxygen is a must for all living things, but not everyone gets it the same way. The strategy changes a lot depending on whether you're living on land or in the water. It's pretty straightforward, really. Animals on land, like us, we just breathe in oxygen straight from the air. Easy enough. But animals in the water, like fish, they have to use the oxygen that's dissolved in the water. And believe me, that comes with a big challenge. Have you ever just watched a fish in an aquarium? You'll notice they're constantly opening and closing their mouths way faster than we breathe. What's that all about? And here is your answer. The amount of oxygen available in water is incredibly low compared to what's in the air. So for a fish to get enough oxygen, it has to work much harder and push a lot more water over its gills. That's why they breathe so fast. All right, let's bring it back to us humans and check out the amazing system we have that's perfectly designed to grab oxygen right out of the air. When we take a breath, the air goes on a very specific journey. It gets filtered in our nostrils, travels down our throat, and into the lungs. There, the main passage splits into smaller and smaller tubes, kind of like tree branches, until it reaches its final destination, tiny little air sacs. And what's so cool about this design is how it branches out. You see how the main airway divides again and again? This structure makes sure that the air we breathe can get to every single nook and cranny of our lungs efficiently. At the very end of all those tiny branches are millions of these little balloon-like sacs called alveoli. This, right here, is where the real magic happens. It's the point where oxygen from the air passes into our blood and the waste product, carbon dioxide, passes out. Okay, I've got a fun question for you. If you could take all of those millions of alveoli from your lungs and lay them out flat, how big of an area do you think they would cover? Any ideas? It's about 80 square meters. That is roughly the size of a badminton court. How incredible is that? Our bodies have this massive surface area packed inside our chest just to make sure we can absorb the maximum amount of oxygen with every single breath. What an efficient design. Okay, so the oxygen is officially in our lungs, but now what? How does it get from our lungs to our brain, our muscles, all the way down to our toes? We need a transport system. Let's just imagine for a second. What if we didn't have a special delivery system? What if oxygen had to just slowly spread from one cell to the next, a process called diffusion? What do you think would happen? So, if we had to rely only on this slow process of diffusion, how long do you think it would take for just one molecule of oxygen to get from your lungs to your toes? 3 years. Can you believe it? Obviously, that's not going to cut it. We would never survive. We need a super fast express delivery solution. And luckily for us, our body has one. And here's the hero of our story, hemoglobin. This is a special protein inside our red blood cells. Think of it like a dedicated oxygen taxi service. It has a super strong attraction to oxygen, so it grabs it in the lungs and then carries it through the bloodstream, dropping it off wherever it's needed in the body. So we have the oxygen, and we have our delivery truck, the hemoglobin. But now we need 2 more things: a powerful pump to get things moving, and a network of roads for those trucks to travel on. And that powerful pump is, of course, our heart. This incredible muscular organ, which is only about the size of your fist, works nonstop, every second of your life. It's the engine that powers our entire internal highway system. The heart's design is just brilliant. It has 4 chambers that keep the oxygen-rich blood, shown in red, completely separate from the oxygen-poor blood, shown in blue. The right side takes in the used blue blood from the body and pumps it to the lungs. Then, the left side receives that fresh, oxygenated red blood from the lungs and gives it a powerful pump to send it out to the entire body. You see, in this process, blood actually passes through the heart 2 times for every single trip around the body, once on its way to the lungs, and then again on its way to the rest of the body. We call this double circulation, and it's a super efficient system that allows us to get all the oxygen we need to lead active, high-energy lives. So if there's one thing to take away from all this, it's that your body is an absolutely incredible machine. There's this complex, highly efficient system working perfectly every single second. And keeping that machine healthy, well, that's your responsibility. Making good choices and saying no to harmful things like tobacco is the best way to take care of the amazing system we've just explored.
Hey everyone, welcome back to our final explainer on life processes. आज का topic? It's all about the amazing logistics and, the cleanup systems inside our bodies and even plants. Super interesting stuff, so let's get right into it.
So let me start with a question. Just think about it for a second. Have you ever looked at a really tall tree and wondered, how on earth does water get all the way up to that tiny leaf at the very top? I mean, it's working against gravity. It's a fantastic puzzle, right? Well, today we're going to solve it. All right, let's start with the plant's very own delivery service. Imagine a plant is like a mini city. And just like any city, it needs a way to transport essential supplies. So, it has its own internal courier services to get the job done.
Now, inside this plant city, there are 2 main delivery companies. First up, we have Xylem. Think of it as the water tanker.
Its job is to transport water and minerals from the roots all the way up to the leaves. And remember, this is a one-way street. It only goes up. Then we have Phloem. This is like the city's food delivery app. It takes the food made in the leaves and delivers it to every single part of the plant, up, down, everywhere.
Okay, so we know xylem takes the water up, but the big question remains, how does it actually do that, especially in huge trees, completely defying gravity? This is where it gets really cool.
So the first force at play is something called root pressure. The roots are constantly absorbing ions from the soil, and this creates a kind of pressure from the bottom. It's like having a small motor pump in the basement that pushes water up to the first or second floor. It's a good initial push, but it's not the whole story.
Because for these massive trees, that little push from the bottom just isn't strong enough. There's no way it can get the water all the way to the top. So there must be another, more powerful force at work. What's the real hero of this story?
And that hero is transpiration. The whole process is actually a lot like sipping a drink through a straw. You see, when water evaporates from the leaves, it creates a powerful suction force. This suction literally pulls the entire column of water all the way up from the roots to the very last leaf. It's such a simple idea, but it's an absolutely brilliant piece of natural engineering, isn't it?
So, plants have their transport sorted. But what about getting rid of waste? Every single living thing needs a waste management system. So let's switch gears now, from plants to us humans, and check out our body's super advanced cleanup crew. Here it is, our excretory system. The main players here are a pair of kidneys, two tubes called ureters, a urinary bladder, which is like a storage tank, and finally the urethra, which is the exit pipe. Pretty straightforward, right?
And the process is also pretty simple. The kidneys filter our blood to produce urine. This urine then travels down the ureters into the urinary bladder where it's stored, and finally it's released from the body through the urethra. Easy.
Now let's zoom in on the absolute superstar of this whole system, the kidney. Seriously, you can think of it as our body's master filter, and it works non-stop 24/7.
All right, fun fact time. I want you to take a guess. How much liquid do you think our kidneys filter from our blood in a single day? 5 liters? Maybe 10 liters? What do you think?
Okay, get ready for this, because the answer is probably going to blow your mind. It's 180 liters. Yes, you heard that right. Our kidneys filter 180 liters of fluid every single day. Just imagine that workload.
But wait, don't worry, we're not excreting 180 liters of urine. Out of all that liquid, only about 1 to 2 liters actually leaves our body. Why? Because our body is incredibly smart. It reabsorbs all the useful water and salts back into the system. Absolutely nothing important goes to waste.
So, where does all this filtration magic actually happen? Well, it happens inside millions of tiny, microscopic filtering units called nephrons. Each one of our kidneys is packed with them. They are the real functional units doing all the hard work.
Now let's compare nature's original design with our man-made backup plan. On the left, you see a biological nephron, and on the right, you see the principle behind a hemodialysis machine, or an artificial kidney. This is used when a person's kidneys fail. The machine does a great job of filtering the blood, but there's one key difference. It can't do that clever reabsorption that our own bodies can.
So the human system is pretty complex and high-tech. But what about plants? How do they get rid of their waste? Well, let's just say nature has the ultimate jugaad for this.
Plants have so many clever tricks. They store some waste in their leaves, and then the leaves just fall off. Problem solved. They release other wastes as those sticky resins and gums you see on tree trunks. Some waste is just released into the soil around them. And, of course, a huge waste product for them is oxygen from photosynthesis, which luckily for us is the very gas we need to live.
So when you think about it, whether it's the incredible suction pole in a giant tree or the massive 180-liter filtration job happening in our kidneys, the survival of every living thing depends on these silent but unbelievably efficient internal services.
And that leaves us with a final thought. Isn't it just amazing? Every living organism, this living city, whether it's a tiny plant or a complex human being, has its own perfectly designed system to keep everything running smoothly. It's something to think about for sure. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you in the next explainer.